being rooted and grounded in love, may have power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, to know the love of Christ, which surpasses all knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. To be rooted and grounded in the love of Jesus himself, and to understand what is impossible for us to comprehend. Just how much the Lord loves us, how wide beyond measure, how deep, so deep no plumb line could measure it out. No height, no depth. There is no way for us to understand or comprehend, and yet this is the prayer of Paul to the church in Ephesus, and my prayer for each of us as well, that in some small, finite human way, that we would be rooted and grounded in the love of God, and that we would comprehend just the barest fragment of how much the Lord loves us, how wide, how deep, how far. This love which does miraculous things. This love which does more than we can ask for or imagine. This love that is filled with the glory and the power of an almighty God. And we see this at work in the feeding of the 5,000. I promise, I remember a seminary professor who tried to convince the class that the whole point of this story was that Jesus was so kind that the people who had actually snuck food in but they weren't going to share it, well, their hearts were open. And so everyone shared what they already brought. And that's why they had so much food left over. And that always seemed so ridiculous to me. I mean, could that happen here? Could that be the reason why the story's recorded? I guess, but it makes very little sense. It says, I think, little about the story and everything about the professor who tries to explain away the miracles of God, when the reality is, if this isn't just about being such a super nice guy and sharing your own stuff, number one, why would John bother to write it? It's kind of, sort of cool, I guess, but it's not exactly what you would call noteworthy. Number two, if it's just all about being a nice guy, why in the world would all those people start calling him a prophet and start saying what a miraculous sign and start threatening to make him a king? Makes no sense. Finally, though we just have this one story here, what happens in John's Gospel immediately after this? Well, as the disciples cross the sea, Jesus stays and prays, and then in the night, he comes walking on the water to the boat. Real hard to explain that away. So these are either miracles, the power of God that transcend our understanding or our expectations, or they're not. At least that's the way it always struck me. You know, why do you need to explain stuff away? It's either God or he isn't. He's either powerful or he's not. He either does these amazing, miraculous things, or he doesn't. Remember, we're here on a Sunday morning and not a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday evening, because this is the day when death is broken and life triumphs, because Jesus, who was dead, is now raised to eternal life on Easter Day. That's a miracle. People don't die and get raised again. I've never seen it. You've probably never seen it. So for this to happen at all, amazing and miraculous and everything else. So if the grounding of our faith is this unreproducible event, then why would you have trouble with this? Why would you have trouble with some bread and with some fish and only 5,000 people? I've never quite understood that, because I see something wonderful about this. I see something very sweet, frankly, about a little boy who's willing to share his lunch. And I see something very profound, that even the simplest of gifts in the hands of God can do amazing things reach and provide for and fill countless people, nourishing them body, mind, and spirit. I think this is a miracle. I think however it happens, Jesus takes this boy's little lunch, he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives it. And through the power of God, there is more than enough for everyone there. Because God can take simple things, simple gifts, simple people, and make of them something more than we can ask for or imagine. I mean, for goodness sakes, in a little while, we're going to have some bread. And we're going to have a little bit of wine. I mean, just like a little bit. Like I'm going to pinch off a little and you kind of eat it. It's not really enough to fill you. I mean, not if you're hungry. And the wine, I mean, it's not real great. Where do we get it from? Publix maybe or Walmart? I think I'm the only one who likes it. It's kind of like this really heavy, nasty port. And I just kind of like it because it's sort of bloody. You know, it's real dark and red, and when you drink it, you know, you kind of know you drank something, right? And so I just, you know, it's a little sip. What in the world can that accomplish? In and of itself, nothing. It is small. It is, frankly, quite mediocre. And yet, in the hands of God, even the small gifts become powerful, profound, can feed and nourish and strengthen and transform limitless numbers. Because by the power of God, it's not just bread that Bruce made. And it's not just wine that someone picked up from Publix. It is the body of Christ. It is the blood of Christ. And we can take that inside of us and not only be nourished and not only be strengthened, but be transformed and bound together by the power of His Spirit into be one body, His body, and connect with people we've never met. Throughout all time, throughout all space, every nation, every tongue, every tribe, for thousands of years into the past and on into a glorious eternity. A little bit of bread and a little bit of wine cannot do that, but God sure can. The miracles of the Lord as recorded in the Gospel of John and the miracles of the Lord as present right here, right now, with each of us, more than we can ask for or imagine. That's what Paul tells the Ephesians. More than we can ask for or imagine. God can take what is very small, very mediocre, everyday ordinary things, things that don't look like they amount to much. Everyday ordinary stuff like me and you, this place, our lives, our relationships, our resources, very modest. I see no billionaires among us. Oh gosh, I hope there are no billionaires here. Because if not, we have to talk about your talk. I see no superstar athletes or celebrities, world changers, not in and of ourselves. See average ordinary folks, residents of Hope County. And yet, it is the power of God who may take even us and make of us something more than we can ask for or imagine, and perhaps limitless numbers may be fed and nourished and strengthened and transformed, even by things that seem very small and very modest. There is a tendency, I believe, in reading in some of the Old Testament passages ourselves into the center of these stories. Now, I love the Old Testament. Love it. Best stories. They're in the Old Testament. Power of God. They're in the Old Testament. You want grace? They're in the Old Testament. It's all right there. Fantastic stuff. But so many of them are stories, action stories and adventure stories. And we've had a few now over the last few weeks from David. And it's real easy, I think, as Christians to transport ourselves in the story backwards and sort of see it as our story because Christ has promised. All of those have been grafted into Israel, that this is a part of your story. But who do we tend to identify here with other than David? Right? I think it's a temptation that we see ourselves as the star of this story. You know, David and Goliath, and he's going to stand firm in the name of God, and he's going to stand forth your giants. And I've heard millions of sermons that are like that. Like, well, if you stand in the power of God, then you can slay the giants in your life. Okay, but you know what? At the end of the day, I'm not King David, and my guess is you aren't either. That would be a little bit like reading a history of George Washington, being inspired by him. Well, he was a gentleman of valor and courage, and deciding, well, I guess I'm going to be a general. And I will lead my people into a revolution, and I will be the first citizen among us all. Well, that's unlikely. It really is. I mean, he's kind of like a superstar of Americana. The best of us all, perhaps. And maybe we should demur from identifying ourselves with the stars of the story. Because maybe not all of us would be able to do what George Washington did or have that opportunity. Maybe not all of us could do what David did. Probably won't have that opportunity either. To be honest, I would probably be, as much as I would like to say I could take a sling and slay a giant, probably one of those guys who's cowering back in his tent, if I'm being honest. Remember, he's the only one to stand up. They have an entire army there, and nobody wants to stand against Goliath, and it's only David. And we just, oh, well, with the power of God, I would do that too. Odds are you wouldn't. And odds are neither would I. So what I think we can take from this is not so much, well, I'm going to be David. I'm going to be like David. Like a story about George Washington, be inspired by what he did. Learn something about our human nature and about the character of God. Those things are true, and those things do not change. But be careful about identifying yourself with the star of this particular story, or some of them in the Old Testament, because there's only one King David, and there's only one Abraham, and there's only one Moses, and you know, these people were, honest to goodness, special and different. And yet, the way that the Lord treats his people, his character, his nature, his power, and his love, they transcend every story. They transcend every individual. They transcend all circumstances and all times. And that we can learn from this, and it will always, always, always be true. So now that I've said that, I'm going to reverse myself to say, let's identify with David for a second. Not that I ever expect to be a king. Not that I ever expect to find a naked woman on a roof. Because it's not so much about the specific circumstances or even the specific things that David does. But there is something to learn from this, in that David is not doing what he's supposed to do. And it gets him into all sorts of trouble. And then David tries to fix it. And it gets worse and worse and worse. I might not be able to identify with the pressures and the responsibilities of being an ancient king, but I can totally identify with not doing what I'm supposed to do and getting myself in trouble, and then trying to keep digging that hole, forgetting the first rule of being in a hole, which is to stop digging, and make things worse and worse and worse. So that's what happens. If you did not catch this in this lengthy passage, let me explain the story very briefly. The same David who has been a hero, a superhero. He's king, and his armies are out there doing what armies do. It's time for war. See, the kings and the armies, they go to war in the spring because the weather is good and it's not winter and all that kind of stuff. This is what you're supposed to do. Now, an ancient king does not lead from the Pentagon or under a bunker or from Air Force One flying overhead. Where do ancient kings lead their armies? Right there with them. These are warrior kings. And he is expected to be there. That is his job. And David is not doing his job. He has sent other people to fight his battles, and he is lounging around the house. So problem number one he is not doing what he's supposed to do. And by not doing what he's supposed to do, he has found himself in a circumstance which will become very sticky. So he's lounging around, not doing what he's supposed to do, and he sees temptation. Temptation in the form of a lovely woman. And he succumbs. Now, if he was doing what he's supposed to do, does this story ever happen? No. He gets himself into this jam. Whose fault is it? Whose fault is this? Totally his. They have intimate relations. Was that a good idea? That's a terrible idea. This is adultery. This woman is not his wife. She belongs to another. He is breaking marriage vows of his own. David's already married at this point. And he is breaking hers as well. And that's bad. Real bad. This is David. He's the superhero. Not doing what he's supposed to do, and then he makes it worse by committing a terrible sin on top of it. One that will stain his own heart and the heart of this woman. Way to go, David. Way to go. Aha! But David, who has been described as the man after God's own heart, he's got a plan. I know. I will invite her husband back from war. Because he's one of those guys fighting for me when I won't fight for myself. He brings Uriah the Hittite back home. Uriah the Hittite, who must have been naturalized into the people of Israel, because he's a Hittite, who shouldn't feel this level of honor and integrity, but he does. He refuses to go home, but he sleeps with the servant saying, how can I possibly go home and relax and enjoy my wife and my family when all of my brothers and comrades are out there fighting? No, I will not do that. I will not dishonor you, my king. Oh my gosh. Once again, David has the chance. I can seek forgiveness and redemption. Uriah is right here. I can throw myself on his mercy and try to find reconciliation with him, this man who's fighting for me. He's a faithful servant, and between he and his wife, who I have defiled. But no, he's got a plan. And David's plan is, I will keep trying to send him home, because what do men from war do when they go home? Well, they spend time with their wives, and that will cover everything over, because if a baby is born, nobody will know that it's me. They will all assume it's the husband coming back from war. And Uriah flat refuses to go. No, sir, I cannot do that. I will not dishonor you, my king, or my friends and comrades in the field. David goes so far as to get him drunk. And it's getting worse and worse. I mean, here's the rule about digging, digging, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And finally, when he sees that Uriah is such a man of integrity, precisely the sort of man you would want to have around, precisely the sort of man you want fighting with you, he comes up with his final scheme to solve this dilemma. He writes a note and he gives it to Uriah to take back to the front and give to Joab, his commander. So Uriah is holding this note which says, hey Joab, I need to get rid of this guy Uriah. But I don't want it to look suspicious. So I can't just knife him in the back. Do me a favor. Send him where the fighting is the absolute worst. And then, all at the same time, everybody but him run away. Leave him all by himself. He won't know that he's going to be stranded, but suddenly you will abandon him. He'll be surrounded by the enemy and killed, and we'll be able to say to his wife, oh, we're really sorry. He died a hero's death. How many problems would have been missed if David just did what he was supposed to do in the first place and been out there with his men fighting, as was his job? And yet, because he refuses this first responsibility, he gets himself into one problem after another, and he keeps digging the hole. The hole gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and now he has affected the life not only of Bathsheba the wife, involved her in sin. Now, David, the new adulterer, has covered his adultery by having his faithful soldier murdered. That's what this is. This is straight up murder. No, David does not pull the trigger or stab the sword himself. But he sets it up so all his problems will disappear. Because I'm the king, baby, and I can make stuff happen. And David, the superhero, makes things so terrible that now lives are changed and one is lost. A mess. And I can identify with, like I said, not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Funny how that tends to lead you into some trouble. And funny how it's easy, once confronted with getting yourself in trouble, rather than saying, okay, stop. I desire to seek forgiveness, reconciliation, and restoration. To keep assuming that I can wiggle my way out and dig a hole deep enough that somehow I'm going to come back out on top. What kind of sense does that make? But I tell you, I would do it. It is a temptation. I must be a far worse person than you because everyone's looking at me like, oh, I would do it. Okay, fair enough then. But I'm telling you, at least for my sake, I know how easy it is to cause myself or other people a problem and assume, well, I can figure this out. I can make this work. And it is so easy to throw good money after bad and to keep chasing the problem and making things worse and worse and worse instead of simply coming clean. Now, what in the world does that have to do with anything else? Simple. I've already said that God can take what is very modest and very small and make it through His power and through His grace. Through love that is so wide and so deep that we cannot measure it. That God can take of those small and modest things and make of them something miraculous and something great. The good news here is that God can even take our failures, our worst, us at our most conniving, twisted, and miserable, and not leave us there in hopelessness and suffering. But God, with a love and a mercy that is so wide and so deep that we cannot measure, can make even of our worst something beautiful and something great. Now, when I say identify with David, don't do this. Don't do this. And let's just say that even in our faithlessness, God is still faithful and He can still accomplish His good will even through our wickedness. There are real consequences to this. Number one, David can be restored, but Uriah stays dead. You got that? Just like we might be forgiven when we seek the Lord, but there might be temporal consequences in this world that simply are what they are, what they are. Though David might be forgiven, he has never not committed adultery and never not murdered one of his faithful soldiers. We see in this that Bathsheba will conceive a child. That child will be born very, very ill. And we'll see David for days refusing to eat and to pray, seeking God's mercy, and the child that they conceived in adultery will linger and die. There might be real consequences that speak not of how God can forgive us, because He can, or redeem us or restore us, but within this mortal life, some doors once opened cannot be closed. But I've said there's good news here. God can take what is small and modest, or even what is sinful and terrible. Sure he can. I'm reading from Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 6. Where you see after their baby dies, David is restored by God. Bathsheba and David find comfort in one another, and she conceives again. That child's name was Solomon. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Matthew chapter 1. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa, Asa the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Jehoram, Jehoram the father of Uzziah, Uzziah the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amon, Amon the father of Josiah, Josiah the father of Jeconiah, and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. Okay, I guess that's interesting. It's still kind of boring. Get to the point, Father David. Let's get going. Yes. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel the father of Abihud. Abihud the father of Eliakim. Eliakim the father of Azor. Azor the father of Zadok. Zadok the father of Achim. Achim the father of Elihud. Elihud the father of Eleazar. Eleazar the father of Mathan. Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who was called the Messiah. That is the genealogy of Christ according to Matthew. And it mentions Uriah's wife. That God can take even our worst and make of it his very best. Does that encourage you to go commit adultery and murder? God, no. Does that show us how the love of God, with a height and a depth and a breadth and a width beyond all comprehension, and a power almighty that can do more than we can ask for or imagine, can take what is small and modest, or even what is terrible and wicked, and still make of it his good will and his good plan. Whether we feel small, mediocre, modest, unimportant, or whether we feel tainted, twisted, stained, and broken. Know again what the love and the power of God can do in you and with you and through you more than you can ask for or imagine.